Good afternoon. On behalf of Mayor Rahm Emanuel and Commissioner Jamie Rhea, I want to welcome you and thank you for taking time out of your schedules to be here to learn about procurement fundamentals. During the next hour, I'm going to do my best to deliver as much information as I can, make this worth your while. And if you'll reserve your questions till the end, as mentioned earlier, I'll take every question at the end of the session. If we run over, I'll stick around afterwards and take questions individually with you. So we'll try and get through the material in as much detail as we can in this short time. But before we get into procurement fundamentals, I want to do one thing. I want to give you my contact information so that you can feel free to use me as a resource at the city in the future regarding procurement. If you reach out to me and I'm not the best resource for you, I'll do my best to find a better resource at the city. But at the end of the day, the goal will be to keep you informed and help you out as much as we can through the Department of Procurement Services. So what I will do is first give you my email. You can email me at my office at terrence.glavin@cityofchicago.org. That's TERRENCE.GLAVIN@cityofchicago.org. Now keep in mind we're streaming all this information online and it's also stored on YouTube. So if you miss anything that I've said today, you can go back at your leisure at your home or at your office and get any information you may have missed during the session. If you want to reach out to me at my office, a number where you can reach me at is 312-744-0851. So please keep in touch in the future. If you have questions, I'll be glad to answer them. And I'll be talking a lot today about the Department of Procurement Services website as well. It's another method for vendors to stay informed, to stay interactive with us. Also on social media, which I'll mention later, our activity on social media. There are many access points to the Department of Procurement Services, online and in person, so I encourage you to use all those access points. Also, I encourage you to look at the workshop schedule outside. We put on workshop schedules regularly. I teach a number of those workshops, and so I encourage you to follow up and attend any workshops that look like they're of interest to you. So before we get further into procurement fundamentals, I think it's important to know a little bit about our department. We are the contracting authority for the City of Chicago. I emphasize City of Chicago because there are sister agencies that have their own procurement authority. Chicago Park District, Chicago Transit Authority, Metropolitan Pier and Exposition Authority. So there's a number of agencies that have their own procurement authority. We are the contracting authority for the City of Chicago. Under state law, under municipal code, we put together a procurement process that has integrity, fairness, gives everybody equal access, gives everyone a shot to procure or to get involved in the procurement process and potentially get city business. Now, when you start getting into the procurement process with the Department of Procurement Services, you want to start talking our language, I guess, is a good way to put it. Every industry has its own language that it speaks, right? There are members in this audience that represent different industries. Some of you sell commodities. Some of you provide work services. Some of you provide professional services. And within your industry, you all speak, over time, your own language, right? And procurement's very similar in that respect. I mean, we try to make everything plain and simple, but procurement practice is pretty consistent across the country, from local governmental units up to the federal government. And we have terms, definitions, things we use to communicate. And I encourage you to start learning that language. It'll be of assistance to you. Now, when you are interested in an opportunity, you're going to probably have found out about it either through a newspaper advertisement, online, or maybe you picked up bid opportunities here in the bid and bond room in hard copy. And what those advertisements do is they give you a taste of what we're looking for. But ultimately what you're going to do if you're interested in a project, you're going to pick up a bid package. And that bid package is going to contain a large amount of documents, including specifications. And those specifications, or bid documents, include a checklist as well. You're going to want, and this is just some, I think, critical advice. When you pick up a bid package and you open it up and you see all those documents, you need to read it from front to back, word for word, exactly what it is we're asking for, because under state law, we are responsible for awarding contracts to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. That means that you are capable of providing what we want, and you are going to respond delivering what we want the way we want it. So you got to read all those documents very carefully and make sure you can deliver what we want the way we want it. There's some common contract terms or procurement terms that you're going to want to know. I think most folks know what a contract is. It's an agreement between two or more parties. It creates rights and responsibilities, basically expectations between parties. And it's no different when you're doing business with the city. You are going to enter into a contract with the city, and through that contract, you're going to form a business relationship. At the end of the day, it's very similar to your business relationships in the private sector. You're going to have a contract, and it's going to create obligations, rights, and responsibilities on your part. I talked about what a bid package is. Now, keep in mind, when you pick up a bid package and you're interested in competing for a contract, after bid packages are picked up, if we need to update the project, which can happen, or we realize maybe there's a defect in the specifications, then what we might issue is an addenda, which basically is like a supplement to the bid package, and you are required to make sure you read that and acknowledge it as well when you submit your bid package. So that's another term that you want to know about. Amendments and modifications. What about once you get the contract? Is it always going to stay exactly the same? No, because there are some contracts that are 3 years, 5 years. They live quite a while, those contracts. And based on changes in circumstances, maybe in your best interest, there's a need to change pricing, to change certain specifications about what we're buying. So at the end of the day, there are amendments, there are modifications to contracts. You're going to want to know that basically those are written agreements between you, the vendors, and the city, adjusting the contract after you've gotten it. The bid is your submittal. When you've read through that bid package I talked about and you realize, hey, I can provide everything in here that's being asked for and I can do it the way the city wants me to, you're going to submit a bid package. Now, where do you submit it? You submit it here at the bid and bond room. Okay, there are occasions where you can submit it electronically. But at the end of the day, you are going to submit a bid, and we do sealed bids here at the city. And there's literally a bid opening. So once you submit a bid, let's say, for example, you're bidding on a commodity contract. So let's say there's a need for the city of Chicago to buy more police cars. And you're a vendor that happens to be a dealer in police cars. So you pick up that bid package, you see you can deliver police cars the way we want them. You think you can come up with the best price compared to other vendors. You put together a bid and you submit a bid package acknowledging all the documents that were in the bid package you picked up. At the end of the day, we open the bid, we open it here at the time of bid opening, and all the prices, all the bids are read aloud. Okay. And at the end of the day, after evaluation of those bids, they will be evaluated and contracts typically will be awarded to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. Now, what if it's not a commodity that we're buying? What if it's a service we're buying? Well, if it's a work service, then we still go through a competitive bid process. If it's a professional service, we go through an RFP process. And there is a difference. And you might ask, why is there a difference? A service is a service, right? No, it's not quite the case under the law. In procurement, under law, work services are treated a little differently. Work services are a little more common in nature. An example might be a very valuable city service or valuable service to the city is landscaping. Let's compare that to healthcare, let's say physician services. So a doctor has certain extra credentials, certain extra knowledge and experience that by law is considered highly skilled. And we can all understand this from our own experience. When you're shopping for healthcare, when you're looking for your next doctor, do you just go to the lowest priced doctor that you find in the yellow pages? No, right? You have a budget, everyone does. And what you try to do is you try to balance your budget with getting the best doctor that you possibly can. And so it's a little more subjective in the evaluation process compared to work services, which is more common in nature. Landscaping was my example, extremely valuable. You look around the city, we do a lot to keep the city looking great with landscaping. But at a certain point, landscaping by law is not considered as highly skilled. There are more vendors that can provide the same landscaping services at the same quality, so you can competitively bid that. You don't have to weigh the credentials so much. You can look more at price. So that's kind of the difference between why we use RFP for professional services versus competitive bid for work services and commodities that we buy. Now, what happens if we need a pool of vendors to be at the ready when projects come around? Now, you might say, why do you need that? Well, when we receive proposals from professional service providers, that takes a long time to evaluate, right? And we can't just advertise and go through that whole process when we know we have projects that are needed right away. But sometimes those projects are at uncertain times. So we need to have a pool of vendors. And when we need a pool of vendors sort of on call, we use what's called an RFQ, or a request for qualification process. It's very similar to an RFP. The only difference is we're forming a pool of vendors that are qualified, and when they're in the pool of qualified vendors, they're the ones we go to down the line as projects come around. Okay. So how is the process a little different? Let's compare all three. Competitive bids, we receive bids. RFPs, we receive proposals. RFQs, we receive qualifications. Competitive bids, lowest price. For RFPs, we don't ask for just your lower price. We ask you for a proposal instead of a bid. A proposal is your written, persuasive document telling us why you're the best vendor at the best value to provide professional services. When you submit a proposal, your proposal is brought in, the document is reviewed. Also, you might be brought in as a vendor to answer questions, explain why you're the best vendor. And at the end of the day, you're scored. And that score compares you to other vendors, and at the end of the day, we award an agreement or a contract based on the most highly scored vendor. Qualifications is very similar. We're not asking you for a bid. We're not even asking you for a proposal, though. We're asking you to submit your qualifications to get into the pool. Your qualifications, it's like a resume. Think of it like you're applying for a job where you're going to be on call to provide professional services. So when you submit your qualifications, and I don't want to minimize how extensive your submission might be. I mean, for some projects, there are certain citywide projects for engineering, for road construction, or enterprise systems for Department of Information Technology that you can't just submit your one-page resume and qualify. There are some elaborate projects where it'll be binders and binders. Who are your key personnel? What projects have you worked on in the past? Have you worked on similar municipal projects like for the city of Milwaukee or city of New York, so you can show your capacity to perform for a city the size of the city of Chicago. So it's like submitting your resume, but it can be a lot more extensive than that, depending on the complexity of the project. But that gives you a taste of the different process. But remember, we break down our purchases at a very high level: commodities, work services, or professional services. And based on what a purchase falls into, we then slide it into a type of process: competitive bid, RFP, or RFQ. Now, as a side note, I'll just mention you might sometimes see RFI. RFI is a request for information. If we put out an RFI, it means we're asking vendors to give us maybe some information, some data for some research, maybe what's out there in the marketplace. But remember, an RFI does not result in a contract. So if you ever see one, keep that in mind. It might not be a direct business opportunity. Now, if you do keep track of it, RFIs, oftentimes, we don't collect data just to collect data. It may lead to specifications that are put back out in the future, and then it might result in an opportunity down the line, but not directly from the RFI. It'll be indirectly, perhaps, from the RFI. Now, when you're contracting with the City of Chicago, there's a very important component of the procurement process and the performance process. It involves MBE firms and WBE firms. Now, a show of hands, does everyone know what MBE, WBE is? Generally, everyone knows? Okay. All right. Well, you can get a lot more detail by going to other workshops that we have about how to get certified, and once you're certified, what you do with your certification. And it's a very helpful path for vendors that fall into historically disadvantaged groups. Now, what do I mean by that? Now, in the past, women, minority groups, people with disabilities have been disenfranchised from the procurement process. That's been found to have occurred in the past, and to remedy that situation, programs were created. One program is for the MBE, Minority Business Enterprises. Another is WBE, Women-Owned Business Enterprises. And what it does is it sets goals for participation by MBE, WBE firms. And to give you an example, how it plays out is, say a prime contractor who's not a certified MBE or WBE firm bids on a contract. They bid, and in the specifications it'll say that participation may be required or is required. And it'll say what percentage of participation. So let's say it says 25% MBE, 5% WBE. What exactly does that mean? That means that when the contract's performed, let's say I'm the vendor that bid, I'm not certified, I win the contract. Let's say I bid $100,000, so the contract's worth $100,000 to me. It means that out of that $100,000, I have to bring on an MBE firm to perform at least 25% of the work and receive 25% or $25,000 of real money in exchange for that real work. It's meant to get MBE and WBE firms access to city dollars through contracts, but also it's not just about getting the money there, it's about building capacity. So MBE firms get work experience on city contracts, hopefully build capacity, and then they can ultimately bid competitively on contracts in the future, perhaps as primes. Examples the same for WBEs. In my example, 5% WBE was the participation, so a WBE needs to be brought on to perform 5% of real work for $5,000 of real money. Now, there's not just MBE and WBE certification. There's also DBE certification. Now, DBE is the federal designation. It's really MBE and WBE combined when there's federal dollars being spent. We abide by federal certification. So DBE participation may be required on a project if it's federally funded. There's also ACDBE. That's Airport Concession Disadvantaged Business Enterprise. See, no one thought I could say that. But that is for vendors that are performing work out at the airport on concession contracts. There's also BEPD, that's Business Enterprises Owned by People with Disabilities. There's a bid incentive for that. So there's a number of certifications that are out there. A couple tips I want to throw out. If anyone feels that they are eligible for certification, do not wait until you have an opportunity in your sites to start the certification process. Because you have to be certified to get credit for that status and that participation. So if you believe you might be eligible, get the paperwork started, because it does take a little time. We do investigate firms that are, and review firms that are looking to become certified to make sure that they are really eligible to give the program integrity. So get the program started. Apply. You don't have to have a contract in hand or in your sights to apply. Get that certification, and then you'll be ready when those opportunities present themselves for certified firms. One other thing I want to mention along those lines, you might be eligible to be a certified firm, but you might not want to become certified, and there's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to be certified to bid on contracts. So you might decide for a variety of reasons, I'm eligible, but I don't want to become certified. I'm going to bid without the certification, or I'm going to subcontract without the certification. That's fine. So don't feel like, oh, I don't have my certification, so I can't bid on an opportunity. That's not the case. You can elect to get that certification if you'd like to. In addition to the kind of participation I've talked about, there's also indirect participation. So say, for example, and I'll use my example again, the $100,000 contract that was bid on. There are some industries where there are simply few certified firms in the specialty areas that are needed. Because to get credit, when you're certified, you get certified in a specialty area. It's not just certification to do whatever you want in business. You have a specialty as a certified firm. You're certified in that specialty area. You can have more than one specialty area, but you get certified in specialty areas. But sometimes there are just not certified firms in certain specialty areas for contracts. And then what is a prime to do in that instance? Well, exercise good faith to find one wherever possible. But sometimes they're just not out there. Or sometimes there's certified firms, there's just a few, and maybe they're working on other projects or they're just not interested in this one. So instead of being out of luck, you can do what's called indirect participation. So if you are using certified firms on other work, example might be, say you have a headquarters and you use certified firms to maintain your headquarters, and dollars are spent on those services. Now, it might not be directly related to the contract that you're bidding on, but at least dollars are flowing through to certified firms in some way, and it's better than no participation, right? So indirect participation is one method by which compliance can be met. Now remember, whenever there's participation, the certified firm must perform a commercially useful function. Okay, so it can't be just you bring on a firm on paper, they sit on the sidelines, you give them a nod and a wink, say, look, you're going to get some money out of this, but we're going to do all the work. That's not the way it works, because that would basically eliminate the capacity building goals of the program. So remember, it's got to be a commercially useful function of actual work in exchange for real dollars. In some instances, there can be a reduction or even waiver of compliance. Keep in mind, a contractor is not entitled to a reduction or waiver of the compliance goals during the performance of the contract, after substantial completion of the contract, or at the time of contract closeout, unless the contractor in writing makes a request to the Chief Procurement Officer for a reduction or waiver. And it's in her discretion to grant that request. A contractor seeking a waiver or reduction of the goals must demonstrate to the satisfaction of the CPO that, remember I said good faith efforts were made? So you have to show diligence and documentation of attempts to locate certified firms. So it has to have been diligent and in good faith. I mentioned commercially useful function. The City of Chicago Department of Procurement Services counts MBE, WBE, and DBE expenditures toward goals only if a commercially useful function is performed. And talked about what a commercially useful function is. And a certified firm must carry out its contract responsibilities by actually performing, managing, and supervising the work involved. Now, this brings us back to a procurement term. You might hear about target market contracts when you're involved in City of Chicago procurement. Under 292-460, that's the Chicago Municipal Code, there are procurements that minority business enterprises and women business enterprises or joint ventures of MBEs and WBs have exclusive right to bid upon. Construction projects may not be put out as target market. What does target market mean? It means we go out to certified firms first. When we advertise, we label it as target market, and certified firms get to bid first. Non-certified firms don't even get to compete the first go around. And when I mentioned 2-92-460, again, that's the Chicago Municipal Code. This is just a side note. I keep talking about how procurement is a competitive process, and I think anyone who has competed for anything knows that the way to compete best is to know the rules of the competition. It gives you a competitive advantage, if it not, at the very least, gives you a fair chance, right? So as I talk, I encourage you in the future to wander around the Department of Procurement Services website, look at information, but also I mentioned that our procurement process is governed by state law. That's the Illinois Municipal Purchasing Act for population over 500,000 people. It's not a bad idea just to go to your search engine online, type in Illinois Municipal Purchasing Act over 500,000, and on the first page of search results, you'll be able to find that statute. Start looking it over. I'm not saying become an expert in every provision, but it's not that long, and it's a good idea for you to get an idea of the skeleton behind our process. Also, the Chicago Municipal Code, which is referenced up there, 2-92-460. You can get familiar with the municipal code sections that empower our department and guide us through the process by going to amlegal.com. That's the authorized publisher of the Chicago Municipal Code. It's very user-friendly. It's amlegal.com, amlegal.com. They have a map. You click on the map. You click on the City of Chicago, click a little further, and it'll get you to the Chicago Municipal Code. And then the section that enables our department is 2-92, and then it goes through a number of sections, including 460. Now, if there's even $1 of federal money involved in our expenditures on a project, federal laws can apply. But I think a good starting point for anyone is Illinois Municipal Purchasing Act and the Chicago Municipal Code. There is a whole separate workshop, again, about certification, but I just wanted to itemize them up there for you. I think I've gone through them a couple times now, but remember, MBE, Minority Business Enterprise, WBE, Women Business Enterprise, BEPD, Business Enterprises owned by people with disabilities, DBE, Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, ACDBE, Airport Concession Disadvantaged Business Enterprise. Another point to make is there are a number of requirements for eligibility for different certifications, but remember, one of the main points is the person or people that make up the basis for the eligibility have to be at least 51% owners and control the company that's trying to get certified. So it's not just where a company happened to have a small ownership vested in one partner, and that partner happens to be eligible. It doesn't work that way. It's got to be 51% so that the certification is meaningful. Under the BEPD program, same percentage applies. And then a worthwhile footnote is that the City of Chicago accepts Cook County certification. So there's some reciprocity. You don't have to go through the whole process again to get certified. Yes, sir?
Do you also accept
The women. We do acknowledge and receive outside certifications, but what I'll do is I'll go through you individually with which agencies we honor. So if anyone has questions about what reciprocity exists, I'm going to cover that after the session, just because I'm going to keep moving, but I am going to answer your question after this session. Okay? Yes, sir.
Real quick question. How long does a business need to be business?
Okay. The question is how long does the business have to be in business to become certified? There is a separate workshop on the number of years, all the certification requirements. I am going to handle it separately outside after this session. I'll be glad to answer that question. And the reason being is that there is a separate workshop that covers the number of years and all the different criteria. And just in case there's any pending applications, I just want to address that after the session. Okay? All right. This is critical to everybody because everyone meets the requirements for economic disclosure statements. Luckily, we are now, and have been for a while now, online with economic disclosure statements. The EDS, we call it, addresses disclosure of ownership. It also discloses additional information. It includes a lot of certifications like you have not been debarred by another governmental unit before, certifications regarding criminal offenses in the past, certifications regarding who owns the company that is applying for or competing for a contract. So there's a number of certifications that are involved. Now keep in mind the disclosure requirement is for anyone that has 7.5% interest, ownership or beneficial interest, direct or indirect, in the applicant firm. So what does all that mean? Applicant firm is the firm that's actually bidding on the business opportunity, right? That's the applicant. That's the prime contractor. Now, what happens if, let's say, Smith Incorporated is bidding on a contract? Well, Smith Incorporated has to supply an EDS to the city, economic disclosure statement. But what if Smith Inc. is 100% owned by City of Chicago Inc.? That firm then has 7.5% interest or more in the prime and needs to file an EDS. There's a third company that owns 100% of the second company. It goes as high as you need to go until the ownership is watered down to below 7.5% interest. So what's the point? The point is that we want to know who we're doing business with. We want to know where city dollars are going. And what the economic disclosure statement does, it allows us to police who is involved, even if it's behind the scene. Because what would be the alternative? Say we stopped with the prime contractor through some not even creative business organizations. You could just set up 3 companies and always be in the background and we'd never know about it. And there could be firms in the background that have been debarred, that have been prosecuted. And so the EDS is really a policing tool for us to know who's doing business with the City of Chicago and where city dollars are flowing. So I encourage you to go online. You can go to cityofchicago.org/procurement. You can go to, there's a tab for economic disclosure statements, and you can actually get started and take a look around. And it's like certification. Why not get started so that if you see an opportunity that's right in front of you, you're not bogged down trying to follow through with the details of paperwork, or I should say online information. Now, the DPS website, it is extremely useful. It has awarded contracts and modifications. It has payments. It has bid tabulations, weekly bid opportunities, new certification initiative information, a searchable MBEWBE directory, and it's all at cityofchicago.org/procurement. I can't say enough. Go to our website and wander around. You're going to learn a lot just by clicking on links, reading things that are of interest, maybe things that aren't even of interest. Over time, you're going to gather a lot of information. What you can also do at cityofchicago.org is you can go to the menu at the top, click on Government tab. It'll drop down a menu. It'll list all our city departments. Now, why is that helpful to you? Well, say you compete for a contract or agreement through the competitive bid, RFP, RFQ process. You win a contract. What happens at that point? Well, you have a business relationship with whatever department asked us to put a contract in place for them. Now, more than one department might participate on a given contract, but there's always a lead department or lead departments that ask for those contracts to be put in place based on their needs. So it's not a bad idea to go to the department's home pages and start looking around a little bit for your own business intelligence to see what it is the departments do, and from that you can gather a little bit about what they might be buying in the forms of goods and services. So it's, I think, a good idea to wander around, figure out what departments are out there. You might be surprised when you see what work falls under which departments and what their actively involved in. Also on that same menu, you go to the left and there's a link to sister agencies and other governmental units. You click on that and you'll have a list of sister agencies I mentioned earlier. There's quite a few more. You can link directly to their procurement pages or their home pages and learn about their procurement authority and most importantly what opportunities they have that you might miss if you didn't even know to go to their website. Talking about some business intelligence, a great resource is if you go to our procurement webpage and you go to the top of the, almost to the top of the page in the middle, there's an icon, awarded contracts. You click on that and the website will pull up a search engine where you can look at old contracts and active contracts that the City of Chicago has had and does have. Why is that useful to you? Well, I think it gives you an idea of what our contracts look like, gives you an idea of what contracts are active but might be coming to an end soon. And remember, when contracts come to an end, I don't want to say we always buy the same things, but we buy the same things in many cases over and over, right? We just, when a contract ends, we give other vendors an opportunity, so we put the contract out, but it looks very similar. So you can see what our contracts look like in your industry, what the expectations will be. You can also get an idea of who in your industry has got city business. Maybe it's an opportunity for you to reach out to those prime contractors and see if they have subcontracting opportunities. They may not be able to bring you in on their active contract, but maybe when they're bidding on the next go-around, they'll include you on their list of subcontractors and you'll be able to network and get some business generation that way. What I'm going to do before I talk last about social media, I just want to run through quickly the process, get a little deeper into the process for each category or method of procurement, and that way you get an idea of what's going on behind the scenes, and it'll help you with your, both when you're competing, but also your expectations as you're waiting for decisions to be made and contracts to be awarded. We do so efficiently, we do so as quickly as we can, but there are certain periods that go by when we're working on these projects for your sake and for the sake of the city. So let's start with competitive bids. Who's the expert in what it is that the department needs? The department. So they draft specifications. Okay? Specifications are those documents that you're going to find in the bid package that tell you what we want, the way we want it. They draft the specifications, they send it to our department, and we polish them up, make sure they comply with the law, we advertise them. Where do we advertise them? Where should you be looking? Sun Times is who we have a publication contract with right now for opportunities. So you go to the classified ads section, you're going to see opportunities there. We also post them on our webpage. We post them in hard copy here in Bid and Bond Room. And you can also sign up for what's called DPS alerts, so you can get electronic notifications of opportunities. When we advertise, you're going to see it, hopefully, as you're monitoring those access points. And if you see an opportunity that interests you, you're going to come down, pick up a bid package, read it through. You're going to sign everything you need to sign. You're going to put the bid pricing in. You're going to bid all the lines of items that we're requesting. And you're going to sign, initial every document, and you're going to submit it by the deadline date. Now, don't be late. The bid documents will tell you the exact date, time, and location where the bid is due. If it's 11 o'clock in the morning and you show up at 11:05, your bid will be rejected as not responsive. If you come in and you submit your bid, and the bid had an addendum that was part of the process, and the addendum says you must acknowledge the addendum with your bid, and say you submit everything except your addendum, we will reject your bid as non-responsive because you did not provide all the documents you were required to submit to respond. So, and I'm not saying all this to scare everybody out of the room and decide to go and do just private sector business. I'm saying it because it is our goal to make sure we can award contracts to everyone that is responsive, responsible, and can give us the best price. It's a shame when we actually lose a bid because we have to reject it based on a technicality. Because what happens next? Oftentimes we have to go to the next lowest price bidder, so we have to spend more. So it's not in our interest to reject a bid for a lower price. But we have to balance that interest in spending or saving with the interest of having integrity in our system. And integrity does require strict compliance so that everyone is competing by the same rules, that people aren't getting exceptions over here while people over here are not getting exceptions. So we have to enforce the rules when we receive bids. When we receive bids, we will evaluate them, and as long as the lowest bidder is responsible, presently capable of delivering what we want, and responsive, gave us all the documents, gave us everything we asked for, cross their T's, dot their I's, sign their name, we will award a contract to the lowest bidder. When that happens, we hand that vendor over to the department that wanted the contract, and a business relationship is formed. We kind of step out of the picture at that point. You will receive orders from the department that you have a contract with. You will deliver what has been ordered to the department. You will invoice the department if it's acceptable, what you delivered. And then when you invoice, the department sends the invoice to the comptroller, and the comptroller makes sure you get paid for your services. Now, the RFP process starts the same exact way. The department's the expert. They draft the specifications. They send it in. We polish it up. We advertise in the same places. When we advertise, you're going to see it. You're going to come in. You're going to submit your proposal. And when you submit your proposal, it will be evaluated, scored, and the best scoring vendor will receive an agreement. That agreement then hands you off to the department that wanted the contract, and the business relationship continues the same way as competitive bids. Yes?
So, who does the evaluation? People from
The question is, who handles the evaluation? The evaluation committee is made up of representatives from the city, could be from various departments, oftentimes with certain expertise in what it is that the city is trying to buy. Okay. So, request for qualifications starts the same way. The departments draft the specifications, submit it, we polish it up, we advertise it in the same places. Qualifications are submitted, scored by an evaluation committee. You go into a pool. When you go into that pool, you have a master consulting agreement that states the very broad scope of services that might be asked for by the city. When services are needed, we come to the vendors in the pool, and if a vendor is chosen for work out of that pool, we enter into what's called a task order. A task order is like a mini contract. It's project specific in its scope for a certain area of work within the broad scope of the master consulting agreement. And when that work is performed, same thing as the other relationships, you deliver to the department that has the contract, you invoice them, they forward to the comptroller, you get paid. So it's the same way. The only difference with RFQs and vendor pools is when you're done, you go back in the pool. You might not ever get work again, you might get lots of work, but you're on call. There's no guarantee of any work, but when there is work, the pool gets that work. Now, when that master consulting agreement comes to an end, they might be 5 years long, then the pool closes, we put the RFQ back out again, and then vendors get to compete for the next go-around, next handful of years where the pool exists. So that's a point worth noting. If you're not in the pool, you're not going to be solicited for business during that period that the master consulting agreement exists. Okay. Yes, sir.
Do you normally put the RFQ first before the RFP?
Do they put an RFQ first?
Qualification first before the proposal?
The question I believe is, does the city put out the RFQ before the RFP? And the answer is they are separate. Don't think of RFQs as part of the RFP process or vice versa. We either do RFQ or we do RFP. If we need a pool of vendors for projects on an ongoing basis, we go RFQ only and we create a pool. If we know we have specific work that we need to get started on and there's going to be a fixed term and a certain vendor is going to be, there's not going to be a pool, there's going to be a certain vendor, then we go RFP. So they are totally separate. Okay. Yes?
The bid tabulation, does it
The bid tabulation includes competitive bids.
Okay, so you would not.
There is a tabulation of vendors for RFQ. I mean, you'll know who submitted for RFQs and RFPs, but it's not similar, because oftentimes we don't request pricing for RFQs and RFPs right away. Pricing is resolved during the process of award of either a master consulting agreement or a regular agreement. Whereas competitive bid, you have pricing always. And so tabulation is meant to itemize who bid and how much they bid. And by the way, those tabulations are available within 24 hours of bid opening, and they're available online. So if you bid, you can actually go online within 24 hours and see what your competitors, you can hear it because it's read aloud, but if you're interested in seeing how it plays out on paper, then you can see that as well. I'm going to keep moving a little bit, and then we'll address some more questions as soon as we wrap up. So I've talked about competitive bid, RFQs, RFPs. Those are the main process. But at the end of the day, what I want to emphasize is once you get that contract, doing business with the city is not much different than doing business in the private sector. You got that contract. What's the difference is just the constraints or the laws we have to live by to keep the process that leads to the contract transparent, fair, give everyone equal access and an equal opportunity. So that's the variety of process. One other process I want to mention is small orders. Small orders are basically contracts under $100,000, and by law, if it's under $100,000, we typically do advertise them the same way as large order projects over $100,000, but the law does require or allow us to have more flexibility in our solicitation process. And for projects under $10,000, we solicit MBEWBE firms first and then go out to the general audience for contracting opportunities. So those are some of the highlights. I'm going to just mention, again, social media. You can connect with us online. You don't have to just go to our website and look at static material. You can also go to our social media sites. So we're on Twitter, we're on YouTube. Like this presentation, workshops, other information are available streaming through YouTube. Connect with us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, a variety of access points, again, that you can participate in the procurement process. So thank you very much. I appreciate the questions we've already had. And then if there are any more questions, I'm going to stick around. Now keep in mind, some questions are project specific, might be something that's very unique to you. If you want to, I'll stick around afterwards for anyone that wants to just ask it without asking a question with the whole audience present. Also, keep in mind, there might be some matters pending, and then if there are pending matters, I can't always address every question, because again, it might be project specific, or there might be a decision being made on a certain topic, and so I'll do my best to answer questions where I can, but otherwise I'll stick around and be of assistance, and again, you can reach me by phone or email in the future. So I appreciate all your time. Any questions still outstanding? Yes.
What is the dollar threshold for competitive bidding? I might have missed it if you mentioned.
Okay, so the question is, what's the dollar threshold for competitive bidding? I don't want to say there's a threshold for bidding, but the way the law breaks it down is we look at things in terms of small, they don't call it large orders, but regular contracts or regular orders and small orders. That threshold or that line is $100,000. So if a project is above $100,000, there are much stricter requirements related to advertising, how the evaluation process goes, and so we follow all those guidelines. If it's below $100,000, we often still follow the same guidelines, but we, by law, don't have to. And what we can do by law is you can even solicit by, I don't know who uses fax necessarily for solicitations anymore, but by law is by fax, by email, by telephone. So under $100,000, solicitations are considered small orders. By our policy, under $10,000, we have even additional steps we take. Like I mentioned, I don't want to call it target market necessarily, but for example, under $10,000, we try to have participation by MBEWBE firms first. And so those are sort of the thresholds, but no, there's not necessarily a threshold billing dollar amount or threshold dollar amount for bidding. Okay. Yes, sir.
The question about, is the city looking to do anything in terms of veteran-owned businesses in the future?
Yes. There is a separate program that actually I teach regarding veteran-owned businesses and bid incentives. Now, there has been a bid incentive for a while for joint venture and joint ventures between small business enterprises and veteran-owned businesses. But there's also just a straightforward bid incentive that is going to be available for, so there's not necessarily a need to do the joint venture. But stay tuned for the workshop on bid incentives. I talk with specificity on the programs. Also, if you're interested, I have handouts on the programs. I can scan and email those to anyone who's interested. I'll try to cover it real quickly, just so you know, we have participation that I've talked about by like MBE firms, WBE firms, but then there's also programs for certain groups that give bid incentives. I teach a whole program on it, but the short version is when there's a bid incentive, oftentimes we give percentage off of bid from qualifying firms for evaluation purposes. So let's say, for example, there's a category, a group that is either disadvantaged or there's some type of need to create a program, a bid incentive for a group. And let's say that program creates a 5% bid incentive. So the way it works is, let's say there's two vendors competing. One vendor's not eligible for the bid incentive, another vendor is. It's a 5% bid incentive. Let's say vendor one bids $100,000 on a project. The qualifying firm for the bid incentive also bids $100,000. What happens if there's a bid incentive? When we look at the bids for evaluation purposes, the non-qualifying firm still is looked at as having bid $100,000. The qualifying firm for the bid incentive is viewed as having bid $95,000 because there's a 5% bid incentive where we take 5% off the bid price. So the qualifying firm in that example wins the contract. Now, when the contract's actually performed, the qualifying firm bills out at $100,000, so you don't actually lose anything by using the incentive. So that's an example. And there's a lot of bid incentives. There's ones for companies that have auto fleets with alternatively powered vehicles. If the supplies that are going into the contract are locally manufactured by a Chicago-based manufacturer, there's another bid incentive. But the percentages vary depending on what the program is, and the eligibility has requirements in each program. So without getting into it too far with only a few minutes left, I encourage you to go to the workshop on bid incentives if you think you might qualify for one. If you want to know what the universe of programs are, I'll be glad to email you a fact sheet that'll give you some information. Any other questions? Yes. Yes.
For construction projects, so for Chicago Public Schools or city buildings, renovations, or building new of those, does that go through you or does that go through those specific departments?
So the question is, do construction projects all go through us, or do they go through sister agencies like the public schools, buildings, Metropolitan Pier Exposition Authority? The answer is we don't do all the construction, only for the city. So if there is construction going on, for example, there's an arena being built out at McCormick Place right now, that's Metropolitan Pier and Exposition Authority is building that. They went through their own procurement process. We're not involved. There might be a new platform being built above for the Red Line at a certain street. That's Chicago Transit Authority, and they have their own procurement authority. Now, keep in mind that sometimes there's area that's being covered by both. Like, for example, the platform for the Red Line over a certain street, the platform is CTA. But what happens when you build a platform above a street? There might be some need to repair damaged concrete in the street from all the construction equipment going back and forth, or maybe there's at ground level, the city wants to make the train station look nice, so at ground level there's new street furniture. So it could be cooperative, so there could be construction aspects of a project that are right next to each other. And in my example, CDOT, Chicago Department of Transportation, might be doing things on the street while CTA is working on the platform. So keep that in mind. But no, we do separate for purposes of our own, each of our own respective construction projects. Yes, I think there's a question.
The department that evaluates the RFPs or the bids, is that information available, like the evaluation process or what they use to choose a certain firm?
That is a very good question. The question is information generated and collected during the proposal or qualification procurement process available to the public? And it depends on a number of things. It depends on the material and it depends on the timing. So the Illinois Freedom of Information Act is an Illinois statute that allows the public to have access to certain records. It's another statute that might be worth looking at if you are interested. I realize you're probably all extremely busy with your businesses, so you probably don't want to look at all these statutes, but Freedom of Information Act has some relevancy there. Documents generally are made public. Transparency is something we promote and we follow. There are exceptions, though, underneath the FOIA Act. If you read it, it allows for general disclosure of information. But for example, there's some documents that are submitted to us by companies that are trade secrets. And we have a responsibility to protect their trade secrets. And we don't want to give everyone's trade secrets away, because then who's going to bid on our projects if they think they're going to give away the store just for competing for one contract. So there's personal information. For example, companies, the owners might have to submit information about their net worth. That's personal financial information that we need to know sometimes, but on the other hand, the public doesn't need to know those individuals' social security number, what's in their bank account, all that. So the timing of it matters. Also, if things are pre-decisional, we don't want vendors getting a competitive advantage by finding out what other vendors are doing during a competition. So information that's pre-decisional can be kept confidential during the procurement process. That's not a direct answer to your question, but I hope you get the point. The point being is it really depends. But transparency is a key to our process, and wherever possible we do provide information in response and consistently with the Freedom of Information Act. And I'm going to wrap it up only because we have another session after this, and I'm going to take any questions after the session. I'll stick around as long as you'd like outside the bid and bond room so that our next presenter can begin. Again, I appreciate all your time. I know an hour spent